opportunity is in front of us, I believe, and I'm going to talk about refugee work in particular. But I want you to understand that refugee work is a particular work. People come into the United States through basically three ways. They come in through immigrant status. And you probably know an immigrant family that has come into the United States, which you apply for visas, get visas. When you get to the United States, then you're agreed that you could be here for a certain period of time, and then you apply for other specific paperwork which would allow you to work, allow you to get a green card, you've heard that phrase, and then move on to citizenship. Then we have groups that are illegal immigrants, and that's people who are coming into the United States that are undocumented. The next group that comes into the United States, the group that I particularly want to talk about, is refugees. Refugees are a growing number of people around the world, and I'll name some of the places where they're coming from. But the largest refugee camp in the world right now just formed this summer. They're fleeing out of Syria, and the war you're hearing about every day on the news is producing about 3 million refugees out of Syria that are just living nowhere. And the UN is working very hard to form them into camps, get food there, get water there. I mean, can you imagine the job, the task of 3 million people in about 90 days to 3 months, 3 months forming, and it's women and children primarily, and you're going to try to get food and water to them. I mean, it's a humongous task, but they have been displaced because of war. That's one way you become a refugee. Another way you become a refugee is because of your religion. And there are countries that if you're of a certain religion, you either move or die. Another way you become a refugee is because of the color of your skin or the language you speak. But refugees means you're a displaced person not because you want to be, but because you have to leave for whichever one of those reasons, or you're going to die. You're going to be killed. And then you go to a camp that the United Nations has formed, and in those camps, the United Nations does interviews with people, and if you passed their test for refugee, you were given a document that says you're a refugee, and at that point, you can go on a list of all the countries who are taking your group as refugees. An immigrant can come to the United States and come very wealthy. But if you're a refugee status, and you come to the United States, do you know what you're coming with? You're coming with nothing. In fact, often in airports, because I get to travel quite a bit, often in airports I'll see families just standing in a hallway somewhere, not knowing where to go, and they just have plastic bags around their feet, and I know they're refugees. So I'll go and try to engage them and help them, because what happens when you get off the plane, people can't meet you at the gate. You have to get through security out into the major airport where the people are. And I've met people several times and helped them get out of the airport to who was supposed to meet them at the airport. Refugees come with nothing. And as we're talking, I'd like for us to keep a verse in the Bible in our mind. And that verse is this: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And I just want you to imagine if you had to leave your home right now and you were put in Calcutta, India, what would you want somebody to do for you? The man standing in front of you, the family is, of course, myself and Gail, my wife. Curtis, my son-in-law, is in this picture. And the couple that you see standing there is a Bhutanese, Nepalese couple. And they are refugees. And if you can think of Nepal, think of Mount Everest, right? So you're looking at India, and a little to the east and north is Nepal. And then a sliver of India goes up, so India borders the eastern part of Nepal. Then you go over is Bhutan. So to get from Bhutan to Nepal, you're going to have to walk across a little bit of India. Well, about 100 years ago, the king of Bhutan asked the Nepalese government if people could come from Nepal to Bhutan to be laborers, to work there. And the Nepalese government said yes, and thousands of Nepalese moved to Bhutan. So you lived there 100 years. Well, the king of Bhutan, back in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, began to fear that there were so many Nepalese in Bhutan that they might take over the government. There wasn't any unrest to do that. That's just what they began to believe. And pretty much what I'm describing all happened in 1 week. That first, you had to take a test, a 7-point test, which was language skills, facial feature, heritage, who your grandparents, great-grandparents were. And if you did not score above a 4 on that test, then you were considered not to be Bhutanese. And 450,000 people did not score above a 4. And that week, every one of them lost their jobs. And Gobar told me how he'll never forget it. As a little boy, his dad knelt down in front of him with tears in his eyes, and he had never seen his dad cry. But his dad knelt down in front of him and said, "Today you cannot go to school." And he said, "I love school." And I asked him, "When will I get to go to school?" And his dad said, "Never again." But they did have properties. I mean, they'd worked there for generations, so they did have wealth and properties. So they thought, we'll be all right. We'll just move to our properties that are out in the countryside until this passes over. By the end of the week, all their bank accounts and all their properties were confiscated. And then the citizenry of Bhutan was warned, if you help these people, you yourself will be punished. And 450,000 people walked out of Bhutan across India to get to Nepal, only to be met at the border that they couldn't come in. What do you do? I mean, what do you do? No food, no water. Well, the United Nations then, working with the government of Nepal, set up 5 refugee camps. 450,000 people lived in those refugee camps. Right now, there are 185,000 people living in 3 refugee camps. 2 have been closed, and the United Nations plan is to close the other 3. All 185,000 are either going to be immigrated out as refugees, or they're just going to be left with no country. The United States, Canada, England, Australia, Denmark are the major ones who take Bhutanese, Nepalese refugees into their country. And the United States takes more than the next 3 combined together. In fact, the Bhutanese, Nepalese refugees are the number 1 group for refugees right now coming into the United States, because they're trying to close those camps. I went to the refugee camps in Nepal for the Bhutanese. I didn't know if I could get in. I didn't know if anybody would let me in. So the first time I went in, I just snuck in. So I just took a translator with me, drove to an isolated spot, and then we hiked into the refugee camp. And that's when I got into the refugee camp, that's what I saw. Those are the houses with about 8 feet between, and it's just thousands and thousands of bamboo huts. By the way, they've lived 30 years in those huts. 30 years. Just other pictures. I'm just giving you brief of what the huts look like. Please notice the walls, notice the roofs, and they have a monsoon season where these camps are at. Just to be able to put things in balance, you're seeing that. Across that road and through a woods is where the refugee camp is. So I wanted you to show what's outside the refugee camp because I want to be fair in the presentation. And you could say, well, that doesn't look any better than it does in the refugee camp. And to tell you the truth, the people in the refugee camps are living like many of the people outside the refugee camps are. But I just want to point out this one fact. There's no mercy for the people in the refugee camps. And the reason why there's no mercy for them is because people outside the refugee camps, and I know because I interviewed people to find out, people outside the refugee camps say, why should we help the people inside the refugee camps? Because they got a chance to go to the United States and we don't have a chance to go to the United States. So there's no help from a community outside the refugee camps to help the refugees in those camps. Now, the man you see standing in the center there, his name is Madden. He's the brother-in-law of Gobar. So Curtis and Elizabeth, she's my daughter and Curtis is my son-in-law, we were praying about refugees, Gail and I were, and Curtis and Elizabeth went out to eat at a restaurant in Kansas City, and Gobar was their waiter. Now, Curtis has been several times to Nepal with me. He's done a lot of mission work with me. So as soon as he heard that he was from Nepal, Bhutan, they really engaged in a conversation, and Gobar, Curtis, and Elizabeth have become friends. Through Curtis and Elizabeth introducing me to Gobar, Gobar introduces me to Madden by phone. Madden then becomes my interpreter to go into the refugee camps with me. You're now going to start seeing pictures of people. Every picture you see of people, what happened was Gobar invited me to come to his church and make a presentation on our work, our ministry. The church had about 100 Christians, all Bhutanese, Nepalese refugees. And when I went to church and made the presentation, the people got fairly excited because I explained I'm just getting ready to go to Nepal and I'm going to go into those refugee camps. People lined up. Curtis would take a picture of them. We'd write their name down. Then they would give us the name of their relative that they wanted us to find in the refugee camp to see how they were doing. So I had a picture, a name of the people in the picture, then a name of the person they wanted us to find. I went into the refugee camp. We prayed, went in, found a person we needed to find. Before our visit was done in the refugee camps, we had found every name on those lists out of the 185,000 people. So we felt like God was leading. Then we were able to take pictures of them to bring back, and these are pictures. So the man and family you're seeing here right now has a nephew in Kansas City. And when I went up to meet him, they weren't very agreeable to talk. I don't blame him. He was just sitting, head down, wouldn't look up at me. We didn't know, how can we break through? So my translator's trying to talk to him, no response. And I had pictures with me. And so I had a packet of pictures and I just laid it down in his lap. He didn't even look. I just laid it in his lap. He just looked, took the pictures, looked at it, and saw his nephew. Started crying. Then he immediately started calling the people around him to come and look at the picture of his nephew and to hear that his nephew was okay and that things were good. And then he gathered his family together and wanted us to take a picture. And then pretty soon the whole community was around talking, and people realized that we were from the U.S. and what we were doing. Then we had people lining up wanting to talk to us, so we had a breakthrough there. This family right here has a sister that's living in Kansas City. This family right here, he has a sister living. His kids will be able to immigrate under refugee. He will not, because he's married to a lady who's not a refugee, and she can't get refugee status. So if he came as a refugee, he'd have to divide his family, and he told me he's not going to do that, but he's going to try to help his kids, his adult kids, get here. That just shows an empty spot. Why do I do that? Because it helps me to understand the plight of the refugee. And that is this. Again, you think all of a sudden you're just loaded up, have to walk out, or in some form or fashion leave everything you have. You go to a refugee camp. You live in a hut like that, and you live there for 30 years. Many of those refugees saw relatives killed before they could get out of the country. Do you think that would have a traumatic impact on you? So now you're in the refugee camp. And what happens in the refugee camp is, to get refugee status, you have to get on a list. And to get on the list, you have to have an interview with a United Nations representative. Nobody tells you when that interview is going to be. And when they come to your hut for the interview and you're not there and you don't have a good reason why you weren't there, then your interview time's gone. You'll never get refugee status. Well, the moment you're taken away, that hut's just torn down. So it helped me to understand, here's what happens. Family persecuted, seen relatives killed, come to a refugee camp, get to know neighbors, you bond. Next day, wake up, neighbors gone. Where did they go? Oh, they went to Denmark. Do you see the separation that's taking place with all their relationships? Uncle goes to Canada. Niece goes to the United States. I mean, just the brokenness and separation is devastating to the family structure. And that's why that empty spot means a lot to me, to understand what's happening with the refugees. This gentleman here, his name's Umesh. He is the mission president for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Nepal. That's his wife and one of his sons. He traveled with me to the refugee camp. He himself had never been to those refugee camps. I mean, they have a lot to deal with, but he was gracious enough to go with me. This young man right here is a Christian minister. We found him in the refugee camp. He was the contact we needed. And what happens is, we're in his house right there. And I took Madden and his brother-in-law and the pastor with me, the president, and we were talking to this young man to see if he would help us and guide us around the refugee camps, and there was absolutely no response. I just thought, well, this is going to turn out to be a big waste of time. When I went, Curtis had got the refugee group here in Kansas City, the church, all together, and took one picture. Now, my eyes aren't that great, but in this picture, you look at them and you can't hardly make out anybody individuals, except you can see a big group of people. And I had that picture in my pocket. And they were talking, no response. And the Lord just convicted me, show him that picture. Now, there's 185,000 people there. There's 100 people in this picture. I mean, what's the chances of that picture doing anything? But I just stood up, walked over, and laid the picture in his lap. And as he was talking and engaging with these men, he glanced down, and then he looked up. I'll never forget it. He immediately glanced down again, picked that picture up, and started laughing. And for some reason, I think it has to be only God's guidance, all of those came from his refugee camp, and he knew everybody in that picture. And immediately he said, I'll help. Whatever you need, I'll help you. And of course, this is all done through language. And he was so happy. He went out and he just started calling people. I mean, I can't tell you how many hundreds of people looked at that picture from hand to hand and pointing at it and saying, oh, there's this person, or there's that person. It was just a huge breakthrough. That young man right now is studying to be a Seventh-day Adventist minister. I mean, he is grateful that we are trying to do something in those refugee camps. Do you think that the Christian church, then down to us, the Seventh-day Adventist Christian church, do you think we have any responsibility to help these people when they immigrate to the United States? As I begin to work with this and think about it, I begin to sense that maybe we don't just have responsibility, we have an opportunity. You know that Matthew chapter 24, verse 14 says, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then what? And then the end shall come. And it struck me in a strong way that these refugees, by and large, are coming from countries where we cannot preach the gospel. If you go to Bhutan and hold an open air preaching, do you know what's going to happen to you? You're going to get killed. If you go to Iran, Iraq, and you stand up and preach the gospel, you know what's going to happen to you? You're going to get killed. The Koreans are the second fastest immigrant group coming from Myanmar, old Burma. If you go there, do you know what's going to happen to you? But the one thing I noticed that was common everywhere in the world was this. A water buffalo just standing in a field, taking a break with a wooden plow, with the plowman standing there in his rice paddy, living in a mud hut, talking on his cell phone. You can go to the poorest places of the world and everybody has a cell phone. And the thought came to me, if I reached a refugee in the United States for Jesus Christ and he becomes a Christian, do you know when his Hindu relative knows it? The next day. Because they're talking on the cell phone. And it struck me, we have an opportunity to truly take the gospel to the whole world right here in the Iowa Missouri Conference by dealing with the people that I believe by God's providence are pouring into the state of Iowa and the state of Missouri. And if we can minister to them in the name of Jesus Christ and help them in varieties of ways, as they become Christians, they will share with their relatives back in the countries where we cannot safely go and preach. Do you think that there's an opportunity in front of us? We have Ethiopians in Sioux City. We've got Koreans in Des Moines, Iowa. We've got Bhutanese, Kansas City, St. Louis. We have Russians in southern Missouri. And we got Rwandans in Cedar Rapids. We got Cubans all over the place that are here. And these groups primarily live in communities. And they have their own particular language and they feel isolated. There is much we can do if we'll locate those groups and just begin to minister to them. I'm going to tell you the number one way you can minister to a refugee. But if you don't do this, all the other refugee work you're going to do isn't going to mean much. Number one way you can minister to a refugee is go be their friend. Just be their friend. Invite them into your home and you go to their home. And you eat their food, let them eat your food. Apart from that, everything else can be good, but if you become their friend, you'll be their lifelong friend. How do you make friends? It's time. You got to spend time. And you got to go through some uncomfortable circumstances because it's not the easiest thing in the world to make a friend with. You can't even talk together. I mean, you're talking and they're talking, but other than just being kind to each other, there's no communication happening. They talk, you talk, and you just keep up until finally, through a development of friendship, I guarantee you, even though you may not share language, you will share understanding as they become your friend and you see their circumstances and they see your circumstances. And it will bring them a comfort and a hope. If refugee work is going to become a mainline ministry in the Iowa Missouri Conference, that isn't going to happen because the conference voted that. That's only going to happen if church members decide they're going to do it. I've never seen one subject touch more people more deeply. Something in the heart is saying, yes, I want to be a part of that. I want to participate in that. Then there's lots of things we can do. There are organizations that are addressing working with refugees, and we can go to those organizations and they will train us and help us to understand how to work with refugees. And it breaks down as simple as this. Meet them at the airport. From the airport, drive them to an apartment. Show them how to unlock the door. Come back the next day, show them how to do grocery shopping, how to do laundry. We can do ESL classes, English as second language. Not everybody needs that, but many do. One of the number one ways we can help with refugee work is being a mentor to their children. What's happening is you're 40 and your son is 15 and you were sent to Calcutta. Who's going to learn Bengali quicker? The kids are, right? Which puts tremendous social pressure on the family because it just becomes role reversal. Because parents who were caring for the children in the countries they're from are now reduced to the children. And the children are the ones who are taking over because they have all the language skills. So they're interpreting for mom and dad. It's really hard on families. And if we become friends, we can help mom and dad and mentor the children too. We have one of the best systems of private education in the whole world. And if we can help their kids get into our schools, the Seventh-day Adventist elementary schools, we can do a lot to help them. Well, I just wondered, so I went to the other conference officers a year ago and I said to them just what I said to you and said, do you care if I raise any money? I could raise some money to see if we could get some refugee kids into school. And they said, well, what are you thinking about? I said, well, I'd like to try for $50,000. They said, yeah, I'll try it. So I made about 7 phone calls in a day and a half and had the whole 50,000 committed.
I want to know who what you to play good later. I wouldn't know so Nepal what is so Georgia and now who is so to play good later.
But now who is so heck if I would have been by but play
decided to send my kid to Adventist school, I believe, not only for their education. I do believe that they will grow spiritually. The tuition cost is a big concern for me personally. It's very costly, and when I heard about this plan of a tuition assistant, it's kind of relief, and I'm really happy. Without the assistant, I don't think I can send 3 of my kids to Adventist school. And if there is no assistant, they have to go back to public school, and that is very sad.
Well, right now, 10% of the young people in our education system in the Iowa Missouri Conference are refugees. We can help with elementary education, but we can't do that alone. What it's going to take is all of us pulling together. Secondly, I've learned in many of the refugee camps that people know the date they're going to immigrate. What would it be if we had workers that would work in those refugee camps who could find the names of the people who are going to immigrate to the United States and the dates and send those names and dates to us, and we can own the ministry of meeting them at the airports by contacting the churches closest to the places of the airports they're going to come to. What would it be if we had a house in the refugee camp that had a washer and dryer, stove, a Western bathroom, and we began to hold classes in that house so they could learn to use those appliances before they immigrated? I mean, wouldn't you find that helpful? All of these things I'm talking about are all possible if we pull together. There's 11,380 Seventh-day Adventists in Iowa and Missouri. And if we pull together, we can do every one of those things and much more besides. I'd like to explain to you a simple way that you can support refugee ministries in the Iowa Missouri Conference. The Conference Executive Committee has authorized a card to be sent to every Seventh-day Adventist home in the Iowa Missouri Conference, of which you probably have already received. You will see that you can pledge in an amount of money. Anything you would like to give would be greatly appreciated, but the suggestion is we would like to find $1,000 households that would pledge $10 a month or $120 a year to become the foundational funding for the refugee ministries in the I-Missouri Conference. These people really do need our help. Don't put off responding. Respond immediately. Sign the pledge card. Send it in so we can build a base of support for these people. Thank you. God bless you.